I was at my computer when she came in late again, around 10 p.m. Dinner and homework were done, and the kids were asleep, barely noticing her absence anymore, which saddened me. I'd been reviewing our shaky finances, worsened over 2 years, while she continued to spend unwisely. After handling the latest bills, I realized we might manage for a few more months, causing me to question my life decisions amid ongoing financial stress. I was so lost in thought that I didn't immediately notice her standing there, watching me. When I finally did, she broke the silence, her arms crossed and wearing a look of disdain. "Michael, I think we should get a divorce." It wasn't really amusing, yet I found myself suppressing a chuckle. My wife, my partner of 17 years, had just declared our marriage over, ready to dismantle everything we had built together. It was a sensation I hadn't felt in ages, and it almost brought a sense of relief. I glanced at her briefly, taking a final mental stroll down memory lane to our happier times. Then, reality snapped back into focus. Okay. I excelled more in programming than in management roles. However, skilled programmers often advance to leadership positions, leading to me becoming the senior manager of product development. Despite excelling in coding and knowing our flagship product inside out, I found myself in a managerial role, missing the joy of programming. The increased pay was appealing, but my duties left little room for coding. Eventually, I was fired due to inconsistent attendance and missed deadlines. It took me months to come to terms with the situation and find a solution I could tolerate. If it weren't for the kids, I might have gone crazy. Their consistent routine helped me regain a sense of normalcy. I fully embraced the role of being a stay-at-home dad, taking charge of household chores and chauffeuring duties. If my wife noticed this shift in our family dynamics, she never brought it up. I'm pretty sure she didn't even notice. We got married right after college and moved into our first apartment in Chicago. Money was tight, but we supported each other. Jennifer left her job after 8 years when we had our son Jacob, and our daughter Emily was born just over a year later. Indeed, they were given the most popular names at the time, following a family tradition. We purchased a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, complete with enough space for a dog, and bought a family sedan and a minivan. Overall, our life was nicely set up with 2 kids, a pet, a house, and 2 cars. Perfectly average. I thought I couldn't be any happier, but I was mistaken. I was promoted to manager right after Emily's first birthday. My new salary was impressive, and it came with flexible working hours. I worked from home most days, only going into the office for meetings. When Emily began elementary school, Jennifer decided to return to work part-time. She quickly landed a job she liked at a startup marketing firm, going to work after dropping off the kids and finishing when it was time to pick them up. It was a perfect arrangement. We didn't need her income, so we saved all of it. I calculated that by the time our kids finished college, we could retire comfortably. 3 months before our 15th anniversary, I accidentally discovered that Jennifer was having an affair. It happened right around my birthday. I actually stumbled upon the proof 2 days before, but didn't realize what it was until later. It took me a few weeks to put everything together. I didn't think much of it when Jennifer wanted to take on more responsibilities at her job, which meant she worked extra hours, and I had to pick up the kids. It didn't really change my schedule, and I was happy to help. After about 3 months, I noticed she seemed preoccupied. When I asked her about it, she mentioned she was just adjusting to her new role at work and felt a bit stressed. I decided to handle more at home to ease her stress. Our bed life slowed down again. I was reluctant to bring it up again, fearing an argument. I was almost at my breaking point when I found the gift. The temperature had dropped quite a bit, and I was looking for one of my sweaters. Since I had taken over doing the laundry, I often got mixed up about which clothes went in which closet. While rummaging through sweaters in her closet, I noticed something behind some old shoe boxes. It was hard to overlook, a pink box with a white ribbon from the lingerie store. The card labeled "Lover" piqued my curiosity. I debated for a moment, should I open it now or wait? I decided to open it. I doubted I could wait until my birthday to be with my wife after seeing the card. Please forgive the fancy wrapping. Your real gift can be unwrapped on your birthday when I'm wearing what's in the box. Then you can have my last innocence. Love always, Jennifer. I'd always been curious about trying a-hole closeness, as we hadn't gone beyond some light touching. Just thinking about it got me very excited. For the next 2 days, I really tried to make her feel special. I greeted her with flowers and cooked her favorite meal. But her reaction was lukewarm, like she was just putting up with my affection. On my birthday, I made sure the kids finished their homework early so nothing would interrupt my evening. I was surprised when Jennifer got home late from work and even more puzzled when she asked what was for dinner. Still, I played along, hoping for my surprise. I suggested we go out for pizza, which made the kids happy. At the restaurant, our son secretly arranged with our waitress to sing happy birthday to me as we were leaving. I thought I saw a flash of surprise in Jennifer's eyes, but she quickly covered it up. "I'll give you your present later, Michael," she said with a smile. The drive home was stressful. I nearly had a car accident. The 15 minutes it took for the kids to get ready for bed were tough, but the next 15 minutes, waiting for them to actually fall asleep, were even harder. Luckily, Jennifer got back from a quick trip to the store for milk right after they were asleep. When I got to our bedroom, Jennifer wasn't there. I sat down on the bed. A little while later, she came out of the bathroom wearing a long flannel nightgown, no makeup, and her hair in a ponytail. At this point, I was getting annoyed with the delays. When would I get my present? She got into bed and pulled up the covers. She started to turn off her bedside lamp, but paused. Oops. I almost forgot. She opened her nightstand drawer, took out a small box wrapped in the same multicolored balloon paper from Michael's last birthday, and handed it to me. "Happy birthday, dear." That was all. She turned over, turned off her light, and fell asleep. I was so stunned that I didn't even open the gift. My depression really kicked in the next day. I kept replaying the day's events, trying to understand what had gone wrong and why our night ended so poorly. I felt completely clueless and wallowed in my sadness for nearly 2 weeks. That unopened present seemed to taunt me, symbolizing my failure. I've heard all the typical sayings. The husband is always the last to know. I must admit, I was completely unaware. I couldn't even imagine Jennifer being unfaithful. It was so unlikely that I never even thought it could happen. However, the idea suddenly came to me when, 13 days after my birthday, she called to say she'd be home late. It's Alan's 30th birthday and the team is taking him out to celebrate. I might be home quite late. I don't recall how I responded, or even how I got to the bedroom closet. But I vividly remember seeing the empty spot where my present used to be. I also recall a terrible pain in my chest and then throwing up in the bathroom. For quite some time, I thought I was having a heart attack, and briefly, I wished it would end my life. Alan Henderson, Jennifer's boss, was a young, slick advertising executive who always seemed a bit sleazy. I had met him just once and didn't like him much because he seemed so fake. It was Emily who snapped me out of it. "Dad, are you okay?" It took a moment before I could see my daughter clearly as she stood there about to cry. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I just ate something bad. I'll be out in a minute. I just need to clean up." I did manage to leave the bathroom eventually, though I don't recall much after that. I do remember picking up my dusty bottle of scotch. I didn't know when Jennifer came home. When I saw her in the kitchen the next morning feeding the kids and acting normal, nothing seemed amiss. However, I noticed a slight grimace when she sat down to eat, and it extinguished any remaining affection I had for her. It was a subtle sign, but it was there. It took until the weekend of our 15th anniversary for me to finally decide to do something about it. I'd been too scared to act, thinking maybe I was just in shock. If my dad were still alive, he'd have bluntly told me I was being cowardly, and he'd have been right. The clarity only came when my wife mentioned she had to go away for a work conference during our anniversary. It struck me as yet another sign of disrespect, especially because she seemed oblivious to the significance of the date. After drinking myself to sleep, I woke up furious. I had reached my breaking point. I called my lawyer and scheduled an appointment. I was ready to end the farce. I was convinced things couldn't get any worse. I was mistaken. The confident attitude I had walking into my lawyer's office quickly turned into utter shock. I was aware divorces were tough. I thought my wife's affair would be to my advantage, but my lawyer found many flaws in my argument. I didn't have any proof of her affair. Even if I did, it wouldn't matter much. She'd still be entitled to half of our assets. I also had no proof she was a bad parent, so the best I could hope for was joint custody. The fact that I made more money also favored my wife in terms of alimony and child support. She would likely get primary custody and the right to stay in our house for the kids' sake. Here I was, feeling like a complete fool, betrayed by a cheating wife. I went from being depressed to completely upset. A few weeks later, my wife even commented on it. "Michael, you really don't look well. Is something bothering you?" "No, dear." She seemed to show concern, at least superficially. As for me, I just drifted through life. Then I lost my job. I didn't realize it then, but that was the best thing that could have happened to me. I came up with a simple idea for a plan. If there was nothing left, my wife couldn't take anything. We'd be left with nothing, so there would be nothing to divide. Sure, I'd be hurting myself too, but I was already going to lose half, so did it really matter? My plan was straightforward. I was jobless, and I decided not to look for work. I was going to use up all our savings until there was nothing left. It was a crazy idea, and even I doubted it would work. But it gave me something to hold on to. 2 years can feel like forever. It was incredibly dull when I was by myself, which was most of the time. I realized Jennifer was the main connection in our circle of friends. As she pulled away, I found myself without any close friends. I'm an only child, and both my parents passed away young, my dad from a heart attack and my mom from cancer. I was completely alone. Detailing every moment of these years would be tedious for you. To put it simply, my life was miserable. The only good part was my children. I had always been frugal and never spent money on unnecessary things. I still kept receipts for everything I bought. I began withdrawing a small amount of cash every week and setting it aside. After 2 months, I noticed we weren't going through money quickly enough to impact anything. It turns out I was great at saving money, but not good at spending it. So I decided to step it up and modify my plan. I signed up for an executive MBA program at a nearby but expensive university, which cost me about $120,000. I bought a new luxury SUV for $60,000 and fully funded my kids' educational savings accounts with another $260,000. I spent thousands on new clothes and started taking out more cash twice a week. I would drop the kids at school, go to the bank, and then drive to the lakefront. I didn't really gamble much of the money I withdrew. I just spent a little here and there to keep myself entertained. I spent enough to show I'd been at the casino, including receipts for meals, snacks, and parking. Most of the money ended up in the wall safe in our garage, my personal reserve in case the divorce turned nasty. My other big expense? I hired a private investigator to watch my wife and her lover full-time. I got the full package: videos, photos, a daily report of their activities. I'm embarrassed by how much I spent on that. You might wonder if my wife noticed how I was spending our money. I would say she did, except for the gambling part. I had to inform her about transferring money to our kids' accounts because I needed her signature. She saw my new car and clothes but never commented on them. I'm pretty sure she assumed I was still working and that we were financially comfortable. She also made some purchases, but I never brought them up. I often wondered whom she was buying all the new lingerie for. However, we never talked about it. We were polite to each other and interacted daily, like roommates who didn't really like each other. As for closeness, that was off the table. Spending time with my children was the best part of my life. I supported their interests, helped with their homework, played games with them, and we went to parks, rode bikes, and watched movies together. Since I had taken over cooking, they started showing interest in helping out in the kitchen, and I found some simple recipes for us to make together. Jennifer was around sometimes during the week. I didn't keep her from joining in on our family time, but I didn't go out of my way to include her either. She participated if she wanted to, without any encouragement or discouragement from me. I received weekly updates on my wife's activities. I initially thought she was just involved with her boss, but it turned out she was seeing several men from her office, and eventually some of the company's clients as well. Did it hurt? Not really. I already viewed her poorly, so having actual proof didn't affect me much. The reports and videos were like badly directed adult films. In some ways, knowing made me feel a bit better, but not by much. It was obvious that Alan Henderson wasn't very good at being intimate, although he had many opportunities with different women. There was one client, a stereotypical geek with glasses and a pocket protector, who was quite rough with Jennifer. The images and video were too blurry to see if she liked it, but it seemed painful to me. Despite my classes, time with the kids, and gambling, I had plenty of free time. So, I started focusing on what my life might be like after my marriage, which I figured would end eventually. I began a new workout routine. I'd always been fairly fit, though nothing spectacular. Over time, I did improve my strength and running endurance. I believe having big muscles and good looks is mostly genetic, and I didn't really fall into either category. Still, I was quite happy with how I looked. I started catching up on the latest developments in my former industry, assuming I'd need a job soon. A year away had put me more behind than I expected. I spent a few hours daily learning about the latest technologies and software. I kept an eye on my old company, CTS, which seemed to be stagnating. They weren't losing market share and their revenue was stable, But they weren't making any progress either. In the tech world, if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind. I also spent a lot of time researching divorces. I did allow myself some time to think up new and spiteful ways to deal with my soon-to-be ex-wife. But mostly, I focused on how divorce affects children. I had worked through most of my own pain, and the kids had been a big part of that healing. I wanted to ensure I was fully prepared for their transition. There's a lot of information out there, much of which seemed nonsense to me. 8 months into my plan, I began to worry. My wife started coming home at consistent times and engaging me in conversation about my day. I responded shortly, but she persisted. She also began wearing more alluring nightwear, seemingly trying to reignite our old spark. After a few weeks, things got even more strained. She had been distant for a year and a half, just going through the motions, but now she complained about our poor communication and talked about improving our marriage. So I stopped talking to her entirely. Her efforts to mend things lasted until her birthday. I left her gift on the dining room table, wrapped in the same paper she had used for the last gift she gave me. The contents were likely no surprise either. It took me 6 months to open the last birthday gift from her, a watch with a cheap digital display. I had seen a similar $9.95 watch at our local convenience store and was infuriated by its cheapness. When I saw a similar model for women, I bought it, waiting 18 months to give it to her. I almost wanted to see her reaction when she opened it, but I wasn't there. The kids and I had gone out for an impromptu movie night and got home late. She had left before we woke up the next day. Then everything returned to the status quo. Jennifer began staying out late again. We barely spoke at home. And then it finally happened. "Michael, I want a divorce." I was hoping she would move quickly, but it took almost a week before I received her divorce petition. It was almost funny. She wanted spousal and child support, an unfair share of our assets in her favor, and cited mental and emotional cruelty. I waited until the following Monday to take the kids camping so they wouldn't be around when I responded decisively. We came back 6 days later feeling relaxed and refreshed. Jennifer was at home waiting for us, sitting alone in the living room looking quite ill, possibly with the stomach flu. I wondered what surprised her the most. I had filed a counterclaim for divorce citing her adultery, asking for the house, the only real asset we had left, and full custody of the kids. Since I had been the main caregiver and was unemployed, I also requested spousal and child support. Additionally, I filed lawsuits for alienation of affection against Jennifer's 7 partners. I didn't expect to win these, but Illinois law allowed it, so I pursued them aggressively. I also sued her employer and 3 clients who were involved with her, not expecting to win, but hoping the bad publicity might help my case. Lastly, I sent a DVD of Jennifer's escapades to her parents and best friend, ensuring she knew I was ready to use it. She should have known about the evidence for my counterclaim, but I took no chances. The kids grabbed some snacks and went to their rooms to get ready for bed, ignoring their mother, who didn't try to interact with them. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat down across from Jennifer in the living room. She didn't look at me for a long time and seemed to be crying, possibly in pain. Eventually, she whispered, "You'll ruin me." I waited for her to look up so I could see her eyes when I replied. After a few seconds, I said, "God, I hope so." I expected to feel more satisfied in that moment. When a single tear rolled down her cheek, I felt nothing. "Do you hate me that much?" "Oh no, Jennifer, I don't hate you. Hate takes effort. I can honestly say I put no effort towards you. All my effort is for taking care of myself and my children." "But I am your wife." "Stop. I won't let someone like you tarnish my wife's good name. My wife was loving, caring, my best friend, and the mother of my children. She's gone. You're just the person who took her place. Don't act like you're related to me." She was silent for a long time before speaking again. "What am I going to do now? Is that a real question, or do you actually want my answer?" I didn't wait for her to reply before continuing. "There are a few things you could do. You could move far away and start over. That's what I'd suggest. I'm not letting my children spend time with you, so it won't affect them if you leave. Or you could stay here. Try to keep your dignity in town. But who knows who will hear about what you've done, or who would hire someone like you. Maybe you'll find someone desperate enough not to care about your past. But what kind of person would that be? Or you could end it all. I really hope you don't choose that. It would deprive me of the chance to see you suffer. But then, I doubt my opinion matters to someone like you. It certainly didn't when you started sleeping with your boss." I had imagined giving that speech for months. I should have felt good about finally saying it. As I watched each word break her down, I thought I'd feel some relief. But I just felt empty. Life after divorce was a mix of good and bad. Surprisingly, I did much better with my lawsuits than I ever expected, netting just over $1 million from settlements with the 3 companies whose employees had affairs with my wife. My lawyer had warned me not to expect much, but after seeing how we handled my ex-wife's company, they wanted to avoid the bad press. We had crippled my ex-wife's company with legal demands, witness interviews, and by leaking details to the media. I also launched a secret campaign, emailing the CEOs of their remaining clients about my wife, her boss, and their affairs, asking if they really wanted to be associated with that company when everything fell apart. Gradually, their business suffered. Revenues fell, and employees who wanted to avoid the scandal left. Eventually, they went bankrupt. Alan Henderson was fired and left town in disgrace. Receiving a $200,000 check from that case was smaller than my other wins, but felt more rewarding. I didn't win anything from my lawsuits for alienation of affection, though I hadn't really expected to. However, 4 husbands ended up losing a lot in their own divorces because of it. But it wasn't all celebrations and victories. The process also hurt me. People familiar with my story would sometimes mock or tease me, which got pretty intense for a while. I'm not sure if it was good or bad, but I didn't really care much about their comments. I already felt defeated, so their words didn't make much of a difference. Some of their insults were even quite clever. I managed to protect my children from most of the fallout. Keeping them safe was always my top priority. They were initially sad, but recovered quickly. My greatest achievement was returning to CTS as the Vice President of Design and Development. During my tough times, I focused on programming and developed an add-on for CTS's main software that allowed it to integrate easily with 2 popular software from competitors. I started my own company to sell my design. Within a year, all 3 companies made offers to buy my company and software. I sold my company for $11 million and received an incredible compensation package from CTS. I thought about retiring, but without a social life, I worried I'd become a hermit if I didn't have reasons to get out of the house daily. My new financial situation enabled me to hire a kind elderly woman as a part-time housekeeper and nanny for the kids. After a year, Mrs. Marlene Jensen moved in with us full-time, living in the suite above the garage in our new home. She was like a grandmother to my children, mostly gentle and loving, but firm when necessary. I valued the advice she gave them, wisdom that only comes with experience. I loved my children and did everything I could to be a supportive and loving father. But I was also damaged and cynical. Mrs. Jensen also became someone I could turn to for advice, especially when making decisions. My children grew up to be well-adjusted adults, and though we saw each other occasionally, over time we became less close. I never blamed them. It was better they kept their distance so my bitterness wouldn't affect their lives. Mrs. Jensen stayed with us until the kids went to college. Then she retired. I offered her free room and board as a pension. She had been a steady presence in my life for 15 years. She always encouraged me to start living again and to find someone to share my life with. I appreciated her efforts, but ultimately she passed away, knowing I would always be alone. I never really opened up to anyone again. My friendships were superficial and unsatisfying. I hardly ever dated, except for a few group dinners organized by acquaintances. I earned a reputation as a cold, ruthless person who wasn't to be messed with. Mostly people stayed away from me, and I blamed only myself. For physical intimacy, I managed well enough. My growing wealth allowed me to keep a regular group of call girls and escorts. I paid them well for their time and company. Essentially, I used them and then sent them on their way. There was one, Candy, whom I liked for a while, though I later learned her real name was Mary Beth. She was enthusiastic and engaged. I felt she cared about me more than just as a client. But I couldn't burden her with my issues, so once I sensed she was getting too close, I ended it. If you're wondering about Jennifer, life was tough for her. She tried for almost a year to talk to me, though I'm not sure why. Perhaps she hoped for reconciliation or a connection with my children. I had warned her, but she didn't listen. She tried to stay in Chicago, so I had her followed. Whenever she applied for a job, I made sure her employers knew her past. When she started dating again, which was almost immediately, I sent her dates information about her past to ensure they knew exactly who they were dealing with. I didn't care whether they stayed with her, but I didn't want her rewriting her history. I had to live with it every day, so she should too. As for my ex-wife, she kept trying to contact me with endless unanswered calls, letters I never read or replied to, and constantly filling my email inbox. Part of me probably wanted to know she was suffering. Perhaps I should have sought professional help early on. It might have saved some part of me and brought some normalcy back into my life. But I never did. And as time went on, it felt too late to help. I could have changed my phone number or had an assistant handle my mail, or even blocked her emails to avoid opening one by accident. But I never took those steps. It was just a bunch of, "I'm so sorry," and it didn't mean anything. Obviously, things had gotten out of hand. She claimed she always loved me. Hadn't she suffered enough? In response, I sent a gift with a simple note. I bought the most provocative lingerie I could find from her favorite store, wrapped it with a pristine white ribbon that highlighted the pink of the box. I included a beautifully handwritten note. I'm sure she noticed the irony as she opened the card labeled, "Witch." I hope my message was clear when she saw the large A plug and bottle packed with her new slat uniform. I thought the "go screw yourself" was straightforward enough. One of her would-be boyfriends tried to confront me about how I was treating my ex-wife. He came to my door drunk, pushing me over as I opened it. It was a mistake on his part. As I've mentioned, I'm just an average guy with no combat training. I've never been a violent person or even been in a fight, but I did have a lot of pent-up anger towards my wife and her lovers. He unfortunately became the outlet for that rage. I ended up with a black eye and a cracked rib, and he was lucky to come out alive. He pleaded guilty to misdemeanor offense and unlawful entry and got probation as a first-time offender. I think his years of surgeries and rehab made a lasting impact. Jennifer never tried to reach out to me again. I stopped tracking her after another year when she got a steady job cleaning at a hotel in a remote part of Virginia, about 700 miles away from me. The only other time I saw her was 16 years later at our daughter's wedding. I know the kids reconnected with her a few years after they finished college. I never tried to stop them from finding her. The years had taken their toll on her. She had gained at least 20 pounds, and deep wrinkles had formed around her lips, showing signs of smoking, which was new. Overall, she looked aged and worn. Yet, beneath all that, I could still see the woman to whom I had once given my heart. I felt nothing for her, but I recognized her. She sat by herself in the back of the bride's section of the church. Her interactions with my daughter were short, polite, yet distant. She didn't try to speak to me at all. We stayed about 30 feet apart until the end of the evening when I saw her waiting outside for a cab. I noticed a small gold band with a tiny diamond on her left ring finger and smiled for the first time in a while. It seemed she might have fared better than me after all. I approached her, fixated on the ring for a few moments. Looking up to meet her eyes, I saw profound sadness in them. "For the record, you ruined my life first." I glanced at her left hand, then back into her eyes. "I am glad you found someone. I hope he makes you happy." I hurried to my car where my driver was waiting. "Good evening, Mr. Smith. I hope you had a pleasant evening, sir. Are we off to the club?" "It went as well as I could have hoped for, Jonathan. Let's head straight back to the house. I think I would like to be alone tonight." "Certainly, sir." As we drove off, I tried not to look back. Yet I did see her brief wave. "Goodbye."
Here's my side of the story. I considered myself cute, as did my friends and family. I had always been a bit self-conscious about my looks and body, especially compared to some of my stunning sorority sisters. But seeing myself through Michael's eyes made me feel special. The longer I was with him, the more cherished I felt. One of the sorority's end-of-year traditions was the husband potential game. As one of the few sisters without a long-term boyfriend, I had never participated. It was a popular event where each sister presented either a positive or negative example of another sister's boyfriend from the previous year. The sister with the most positive responses about her boyfriend won. I wasn't totally surprised by the outcome, but it did catch me off guard a bit. In the 29-year history of the event, Michael received all positive responses for the first time, one from every sister. I felt incredibly proud, though a bit bummed that tradition prevented me from telling him about his win. The day after graduation, we arrived at my childhood home just before lunch, and Michael spent the next 2 hours charming my parents, even asking my dad if he could buy him a beer. Later, he revealed that he had asked my father for permission to marry me. During my college years, being an innocent had always made me a bit embarrassed. I'm pretty sure I was the only sorority sister who hadn't experienced closeness yet. I knew Michael was also inexperienced, like me. After the amazing experience, I couldn't help but ask where he learned to be such a great lover. In his humble way, he whispered, "I read. A lot." I can't even find the right words to express how happy I was during the first decade of our life together. Having children completed my life, but those details aren't relevant to what went wrong. Sharing those happy years wouldn't help you understand why I made the choices I did. I understand my mistakes, or rather, mistakes. I know why I fell. I didn't trust Michael enough. One thing I admired most about Michael was his openness with me. He shared everything, including his insecurities. He never hid from me. For a long time, I had nothing to hide. He involved me in every decision that impacted our lives. Even though he earned more and was better with finances, he always valued my opinion. It made me feel special most of the time, but sometimes I felt inadequate, like I wasn't doing my part. I never talked to Michael about this. If I had, I wouldn't have ruined my life. He would have supported me. I know he loved me deeply. He would have helped me feel complete. That small feeling of insecurity kept growing over time. It might have even gotten worse. By the time our kids were in school, I felt like I didn't belong in my own life. I felt like I needed something different, something to give me my own sense of purpose. I wasn't looking for another partner, not at all. I loved my husband, and I was perfectly happy with our bed life. It was passionate, although maybe a bit predictable, mostly because of me. I knew my husband wanted to try new things in the bedroom, but I didn't want to change what we had. What I really wanted was to feel like I was on equal footing, not just be treated like it. So I found a job and decided to take it. I had everything planned out, ready to explain why I wanted to work. But our conversation didn't last long. "I think that's great, Jennifer. Whatever makes you happy." And just like that, my problem was solved. I had done it all on my own. I didn't need anyone's help. Looking back, I realized how foolish I was to think I had it all figured out. But at the time, it felt amazing. I felt like I could conquer the world as a confident, independent woman. The atmosphere in our office was often flirty, and at its worst, it could be described as downright debaucherous. My coworkers, both men and women, were young, bold, and full of life. There were several office romances happening. No one was in a committed relationship. It was all about casual act, and nobody seemed to hide it or think it was wrong. My boss was probably the worst of them all. Alan Henderson was decent-looking, although not really my type. People often teased him about his inability to keep a girlfriend and cheered him on for his latest conquests. I didn't rush into bed with the first guy who showed interest in me. In fact, I turned him down flat. But it did make me wonder if Michael and I were missing something in our bed life. Our circle of friends was pretty conservative when it came to closeness. We never had conversations anywhere close to what I heard at work every day. After our first company Christmas party, when I introduced Alan to Michael, things changed. Even though they pretended to get along, I could tell they didn't like each other. I stopped talking to Michael about my job and never mentioned Alan. I could tell it bothered Michael. After that night, things felt different at the office too. Alan started giving me a lot of attention, praising my work publicly, and asking about my well-being. He started inviting me to lunch with him, where we'd talk extensively about work. He began seeking my opinion more often, then he'd ask personal questions before we returned to work. He also started complimenting my appearance, using words like hot and provocative. Looking back, he worked on me for months and I foolishly fell for it. I can't recall the exact sequence of events that led to Alan and with him having closeness with me on his desk after everyone else had left for the day. It's with deep regret that I admit I enjoyed every minute of it. Alan's skillful seduction made me feel desired, an emotion I thought I'd lost. Years later, when I reflected on my actions, I realized the extent of my betrayal. I didn't feel desired by Michael because I didn't give him a reason to desire me. I knew the kind of man he was. He wouldn't do anything to make me uncomfortable. I was his true partner and cherished lover, not just a fling. But he was perceptive. Any hint from me would have made a difference. Any indication that I wanted something different would have had a significant impact. A painful review of my marriage showed that Michael gently probed for any opening to spice up our bed life, and I ignored him. We engaged in BJ, but I never initiated it. I wore lingerie, but I never took the initiative to be more adventurous. And I never let him explore certain aspects of our intimacy. Not even once. I am morbidly ashamed to admit I did all those things, and much more for Alan. I was a slut for him, and I loved it. I was in way too deep with Alan before I recognized the truth. I had given Alan the gift of my innocence on his birthday. He treated me in the manner that I deserved. I gave him a gift and he used it. It was painful. The contrast to Michael was startling and changed my thinking almost immediately. Alan didn't love me and I was making a terrible mistake. I told Alan our affair was over the very next day. He laughed at me and shooed me out of his office. When I got back from lunch, there was a package waiting on my desk. It came with a note telling me to be in Alan's office at 5:30. Inside the package were photos of Alan and me in compromising positions. These pictures kept me under his control and trapped me in a nightmare that lasted for over a year and a half. Being coerced into sleeping with my 2 co-workers in Alan's office felt almost tolerable compared to what else I was forced to endure during those 18 months. I won't go into detail, but I felt like I was being used by Alan like a prostitute, and I despised him almost as much as I despised myself. I struggled to find a way out of the situation, but always came up short. It wasn't until I reached a breaking point with the awful things I was being forced to do that I finally saw a way out. When they demanded that I have closeness with a guy in a crowded conference room, I knew I couldn't take it anymore. It was a horrifying experience, and it was the final straw. I finally found my solution after searching for so long. Courage. I confronted Alan and told him I was done, no matter who he showed the pictures to. He just laughed, and that was the end of it. I felt like such a fool for letting it go on for so long. When I woke up from my nightmare, I was surprised at how things were going at home. Michael and the kids seemed to be doing fine without me. I thought they might be struggling without my attention, but it was the opposite. It seemed like they didn't need me at all. Michael was still doing well. He had a new car, new clothes, and looked successful. I felt terrible realizing how long I'd neglected my family. I decided to dedicate myself to them and make up for my mistakes. But there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. I wondered how long it had been there. Michael never yelled at me or argued, but he treated me like I wasn't wanted. I tried to reconnect with him, but nothing worked. He hardly touched me. After a few months, I looked at our marriage. No intimacy, no communication. I couldn't live like that. I suggested marriage counseling, but then Michael stopped talking to me altogether. Not a word for weeks. I was at my wit's end when my birthday came. I hoped he wouldn't ignore me on my birthday, but I was wrong. When I got home from work, the house was empty except for a wrapped box on the dining table. I knew what it was without opening it. Years ago, I forgot Michael's birthday and got him a cheap watch as a last-minute gift. I planned to make it up to him, but I never did. His present was intentional, unlike mine. I was angry when I went to bed. Keeping the kids away on my birthday felt cruel. I couldn't believe he'd do that. And the present crossed a line. I should have realized something was wrong. Michael wasn't evil, he was gentle and loving. If I hadn't been blinded by anger, maybe I could have saved our marriage by admitting my mistakes and asking for forgiveness. But in that moment, I stopped trying to save our marriage and started thinking about divorce. It was sad, but I was determined. It took a few weeks to sort things out with a lawyer. I told her how Michael had been distant and cruel, how he kept the kids from me, ignored my requests for counseling, and stopped talking to me. My lawyer saw an opportunity and assured me of a good settlement. We filed for divorce. I tried to be fair, but also fought for what I needed for a decent life. All that was left was to tell Michael. I stood in the doorway, watching the man who was once my husband. He looked the same, but he wasn't. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Michael, I want a divorce. There was a long silence, but he showed no emotion. I thought I saw him smile, but he was probably in shock. His response surprised me. No yelling, no questions. Okay, the following Friday, he got the divorce papers. Michael seemed nicer over the weekend, But if he was trying to fix things, it was too late. I wasn't interested in making up. He even said goodbye as I left for work on Monday. Too little, too late, I thought. When I got to the office, there was chaos, but I didn't know why. My boss, the company president, and our lawyer were yelling in the conference room. Papers were flying everywhere. I was so focused on that scene, I didn't notice the man waiting for me. "Are you Jennifer Smith?" "Yeah." "You've been served." He gave me a big envelope, took my picture, and left. I didn't even have time to sit down before a security guard and HR manager approached me. "Mrs. Smith, you're suspended while we investigate claims of misconduct. Please gather your things and leave," she said. It was embarrassing packing up while everyone watched. Being escorted out was even worse. I had no clue what was happening. As I left the parking lot, my lawyer called. She was furious, accusing me of hiding things and making her look bad. I drove home silently. Once there, the house felt empty again. It hit me hard when I finally calmed down enough to look at the envelope. Michael's response to my divorce petition was brutal. He had documented every affair I had, and our savings were drained. The word adultery cut deep. Calling my parents for support only made things worse. My dad called me names and hung up. I knew why. Those next 7 days felt like the loneliest of my life, but looking back, they were almost peaceful. Michael had taken the kids camping and left a note. My friend Rebecca called, warning me about a DVD Michael sent her. As my lawyer outlined my bleak situation, it sunk in. I was fired, my company and clients were sued, and I'd lose custody of my kids. It felt hopeless. I'd do anything to stop the lawsuits. I tried to compose myself before Michael and the kids returned, but I couldn't stop crying. When they got back, it was like I was invisible. Michael, relaxed with a beer, barely acknowledged me. I could hardly speak. "You're ruining me," I managed. "I hope so," he spat with venom. When I mentioned our past as a married couple, he hurled insults at me. Even though I wasn't directly talking to him, Michael launched into a vicious verbal attack, calling me names that cut deep. I tried my best to reconnect with Michael, but he shut me out completely. I worried about how he and the kids were managing financially, but everything seemed fine. Sometimes I'd secretly watch him dropping off or picking up the kids at school. Unable to find a job and shunned by my parents, I moved from friend to friend, mostly divorced men. None of them wanted me around for long. Seeing a therapist, as suggested by my lawyer, offered some hope, but I felt little optimism. During therapy, I worked through some issues, many of which I've shared with you. But the therapist's most valuable advice came later: to leave, to get away. I'm not sure why he chose to respond to me, whether it was a call, email, or one of the many letters I sent. But I returned home to find a package from Michael, a clear message of his disdain, suggesting how I should spend my time. I couldn't understand why knowing that he knew about my betrayal hit me so hard, but it did. I cried a lot. At that time, I was staying with a guy named Robert, a friend of a friend. He seemed nice, but I sensed he wanted more than just being roommates. When he saw the package and realized what it meant, he got really angry and stormed out before I could stop him. I got worried when Robert didn't return after a few hours. Turns out he went to confront Michael. The hospital staff didn't give many details, but they said Michael had nearly offed him. Robert's injuries were severe: a messed up face, concussion, internal injuries, and a shattered leg. It was awful. My problems were causing harm to the people around me. I told my therapist everything during our next session. She asked a lot of questions about Michael. I shared everything I knew about him, his background, our relationship, and his actions after finding out about my affair. I also told her what happened to Robert. After hearing it all, she looked scared. "You need to get out of here. Far away. Don't contact him. Don't let him know where you are. There's no chance of fixing things. Move on. If you push him, he might destroy you. Your actions have shattered a man who is barely holding on. He's faced disappointment all his life. He'll never forgive or forget. Run." So I left behind the memory of my once perfect life and ended up in a crappy college town in Virginia, where I landed an even crappier job. Years later, I found a guy who could put up with me and overlook my past. He wasn't great, but at least he didn't stink or hit me. Our relationship lacked love, it was just about having someone around. I figured it was part of my punishment. When my kids grew up, they reached out to me, just to check in and let me know they were okay. They never asked to see me or have a real connection. Michael, on the other hand, thrived without me. I kept tabs on him through the news. He was always a big shot in the software world, rolling in wealth. Not much was said about his personal life. I saw him again at our daughter's wedding. I was surprised to be invited. He looked amazing, just like the man I once loved and betrayed. I admit I was a bit scared when he came over to me to get in his final jab. "Just so you know, you wrecked my life first," he said, eyeing my cheap wedding ring. In that moment, I wished I'd never put it on. "I'm glad you found someone. I hope he makes you happy," he added before disappearing.